Hey everyone, Jeff Dorman, CIO of Arca, back again for another edition of That's Our Two Satoshis Live, where we talk everything happening that's relevant in the digital asset market. And happy to be joined again by Alex Thorn, Director of Research at Galaxy Digital. How you doing, sir?
Jeff, I'm great. How are you doing, man? Great to be back.
Yeah, I'm doing well. I'm doing well, mostly because there's at least a couple exciting things going on in the crypto markets again, which is always nice. So,
Yeah, nothing does wonders for sentiment than price increases.
even price decreases are fine as long as there's some volatility and there's some
That's
rationale.
true.
It's boring when you just sort of sit there and there's nothing to sink your teeth into. So before we get started, as always, Alex, just real quick disclaimer: this is not financial advice. Obviously, those who like to read instead, you can always go to our blog ar.ca/blog and read the written. That's our two Satoshis. Although we do sway from that a little bit here when we talk. So Alex, I don't know what you're seeing in the market, but basically when I wrote this week, I spent a lot of time talking about meme coins, which we're not going to spend a lot of time on here, just because that's clearly something that's actually happening in the market. And just the only thing I would leave our readers with is that whether you believe in meme coins or not, there are real businesses being built off meme coins. And what I mean by that is you look at like Pump.fun, one of the biggest beneficiaries of this run with meme coins, generating hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue, just making it really easy for people to launch and trade meme coins. So I thought that was interesting. For those who care about meme coins, again, go to the blog and read that. But what Alex and I are going to focus on here is the election. We're 3 weeks away. Clearly, I guess probably the most important election in crypto's young history.
Yeah,
If
I
you
mean,
guys,
I would say so. Like, I think um, it kind of in both ways, right? I mean, crypto has never been as meaning. No matter what happens, sort of, I think it may be the most important. And I'll to say why. I think crypto has been important, but it's never been a mainstream political issue as it has during this election cycle, right? I think the crypto super PAC Fair Shake is the largest super PAC in the election cycle. It's raised the most capital. Both political candidates for president have talked about crypto. Obviously, former President Trump has been extremely vocal and very specific and positive for Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies in general. He's sold NFTs. He's launched his own DeFi protocol, World Liberty Financials. He's clearly very involved. But even the current vice president and current Democratic presidential nominee Kamala Harris has also mentioned digital assets, blockchains, and now crypto assets, which is a first, right? So you've got, and is attempting to signal, I think, some positivity towards the industry. I think certainly much more vague and less verbose than former President Trump. So you've got two candidates for the highest office in the United States, ranging now from tepid, I'm going to call tepid support, to full throated support, right? And so, but that's sort of showing their support and interest in the issue. I think the reason it's so important, if Trump wins the election, you're likely to see wholesale reworking and rulemaking of the regulatory framework in the United States. It'll be like an entire new asset class now will get sort of formal handling, whereas mostly in the US, you've seen regulators take an enforcement first approach and not really a rulemaking approach.
Yep.
And to the extent they've done rulemaking or from the signals that they've done on enforcement, it's been mostly to relegate digital asset activity outside the United States, right? So you're likely to get under a Trump presidency and administration the formulation finally of a comprehensive regulatory regime for digital assets in the US that is supportive of the growth of the industry, and that will be felt for decades to come if it comes to pass. Even under a Harris regime, it'll still be very important. Even if she's identical to the Biden administration, the delta between what we're likely to see from a Trump and a Harris administration is so massive that would make this election the most important. But honestly, from the signals we're seeing and from some of the personnel around Vice President Harris, we think she's likely to be at least marginally better than the Biden administration. So in either case, big change, I think, is coming.
Yeah, and let's talk market reaction for a second. So first and foremost, you go back 4 years ago. Obviously, there's not a lot of presidential cycles to look at when it comes to digital assets. But 4 years ago, you saw sort of a relief rally after the election, not necessarily because who was elected, but simply because markets hate uncertainty more than they hate bad outcomes. And even though every presidential election, 50% of the people are basically disappointed, the fact that there was an actual peaceful transfer of power, the fact that there was, even though there was obviously a fair amount of talk about election fraud and miscounting and things like that, you at least had an elected president. You knew going into January there was going to be a peaceful transfer of power. Markets loved it. You had the equity market go crazy. You had crypto go crazy into the end of the year. Less about the candidates, though, and again, more about just sort of a relief rally. As we head into this one, markets are a little bit different, right? There's obviously a lot more of a binary outcome. To your point, I think no matter what, it's going to be better than the status quo. But, handicap something like maybe a 30% rally if Trump wins in crypto, maybe a 10% sell-off if Kamala wins. So you're still looking at 3-to-1 upside. But more importantly, you're seeing a kink in the curve. If you look at the options market, just based on how volatility is expressed, not uncommon around a big event, but you're seeing a massive kink in the curve, meaning it is incredibly cheap to buy any sort of calls or puts ahead of the election and incredibly expensive to do it thereafter, which is the market's way of saying that they are pricing in some sort of a big reaction one way or another to what we get on election day. Not to mention that there's an FOMC meeting the next day or 2 days after as well. So a lot going on that first week in November. Do you agree with sort of how I'm handicapping it there? That somewhere plus 3-to-1 kind of upside to downside ratio, regardless here?
Yeah, I think that's right. I mean, I think it's very clear that I think the way we expressed it to our counterparties was that there's the opportunity for explosive upside, I think, and then even in the near term, in the case of a Trump victory, and downside is relatively capped. I mean, and so I think that's right. 3-to-1 upside to downside makes sense. I do increasingly lately think it may even be possible that we don't see much of a downside at all in the near term. Simply, it's sort of like an explosion of upside if Trump wins. I mean, again, for your viewers, and I know you know this, Jeff, I mean, Trump is promising a wholesale overhaul of the regulatory regime. So it's undoubtedly positive with Trump. I think it's possibly the same, if not just slightly better with Harris. And so you might just get the same. It's like a 2020 relief rally in cryptos anyway, just because, okay, now it's finally over and we know, and worst case, it's the same as now. I view it similarly though to you. I think, in general, I think she's much worse than Trump, as a Trump administration would be, than Trump. And so, yeah, I think investors are really interested in to see how, frankly, I mean, with Trump, and he's talking about a national Bitcoin stockpile. He said fire Gary Gensler twice in Nashville, right? I mean, there's the likelihood of a significant rally if he wins.
Yeah, and looking back at 2020, here are Bitcoin's returns and the S&P 500's returns. So in September of 2020, Bitcoin down 6, the S&P down almost 4. October of 2020, Bitcoin down 7, S&P down almost 3. Then you get the election. November of 2020, Bitcoin up 29%, the S&P up almost 11%. And then December of 2020, Bitcoin up 15, S&P up almost 4. So again, it's a tiny sample size. Not to say that you always have to believe in these 4-year cycles or in the history when it comes to something as young as crypto, but there is reason to believe that the market is right, that this is a big event and something big is going to happen. But what I thought was more important about what you guys said is in addition to just having this very sort of binary, if Trump wins, market good, if Kamala wins, market less good, but still probably better than the status quo, you guys broke it down into sectors and real issues of where you think the strength and weakness comes under each regime. I thought that was really interesting because for those who still remember like motif investing, for example, back when ETFs were still kind of getting going and there weren't nearly as many of them as there are today, there's a really nice firm called Motif Investing that basically let you create your own ETFs. You could just be like, I want to create a energy ETF and I want to put these tickers in there, or I want to create this. And a lot of times around elections, there you would see election-based ETFs. Like if Hillary Clinton wins, this is the stocks that are going to do well. If Trump wins, these are the stocks that are going to do well. Or same thing with when you had Obama, it was different regimes were naturally going to be better or worse for some industries. I hadn't seen that in crypto. Again, it was very binary, just this good, this bad, until you guys put something out there. What went into that analysis? And again, for those who want to see it, hopefully you already subscribed to Galaxy's emails. If not, you can go to our blog, ar.ca/blog, and look at the screenshot that I put in there of Galaxy's not a heat map, but of a Venn diagram showing what does well. You basically said Bitcoin does well no matter what, but then you had AI doing well under Kamala, maybe low carbon footprint doing well under Kamala, whereas pretty much everything else better under Trump, right? Things like DeFi, Bitcoin miners. We'll just walk through kind of how you thought about this, where the real winners and losers are, and what to expect on election day in either case.
Yeah, let's start in the middle of the diagram. And if you think about Bitcoin specifically, right? Bitcoin has no business really before the SEC or regulators, really, other than, say, FinCEN and the Terrorism and Financial Intelligence Office inside Treasury, right? There are Bank Secrecy Act and sanctions issues that do affect Bitcoin the way they affect sort of all of cryptos, right? That's things like sanctioning or requiring Bank Secrecy Act reporting from non-custodial entities like wallets and miners and validators, sort of like the Tornado Cash and sanctions related stuff, Samurai Wallet. Those things would affect Bitcoin under any presidency, most likely, but it has no business before the SEC. It's got its ETFs. There's not really tokens on Bitcoin, not in earnest, leaving aside some edge cases. Doesn't have native DeFi yet, so it's not really right. So Bitcoin, we think, is basically fine under either presidency, right? I think if you look at what's bad, let's say what's good under Trump and bad under Harris, right? The very clear stuff is where the SEC is alleging unregistered securities were offered by issuers, and there's a list of about 60 of those coins, right? There's also DeFi, certain actions like at the SEC with the new exchange definition, very damaging definition theoretically for DeFi, although I think is mostly excluded at the moment, but tons of interest in, right? And they've got sued against Uniswap or Wells Notice on Uniswap, right? There's very clear downside for, I would say, Ethereum and other smart contract protocols that have things like DeFi or lots of tokens, and that's all definitely in jeopardy if the current regime continues. Now, like I said, there's some belief that it may not, that Kamala might be slightly better. But in general, right, things under Trump, though, I mean, energy, Bitcoin mining is a great example. He's saying drill, baby, drill. He has characterized Bitcoin miners as part of America's industrial base, which is part of a domestic manufacturing. He wanted all of Bitcoin to be made in America. Like, that's very clear. I think similarly, I mean, he's launching his own DeFi protocol. Very unlikely under a Trump administration that something like a World Liberty Financial, which is sort of an Aave wrapper, would be considered illegal, and or that he would appoint regulators who would think that was illegal. So very likely to get constructive rulemaking or regulatory opinions on all of sort of those sectors. I think on the Kamala side, she was a co-sponsor of the Green New Deal. That's one of the few bills that she has her name on it in the U.S. Senate. So we don't think she'd be good. Most likely, I mean, this is based on very little, right? She hasn't said much, but probably not great on Bitcoin mining or other energy intensive things. But then on the flip side, the idea is, well, things that are greening, things that are even AI, the reason we thought broadly, even though it's also energy intensive, she is a product of Silicon Valley, right? She's from San Francisco. She represented San Francisco. A lot of her tech supporters come from, the venture capital sort of industry and landscape, which includes things like AI. We think it's very possible that she would take a stance. Again, we're guessing here, right? I mean, she's not. But in her policy statements, she talks about American dominance in technologies like blockchain and AI. So we think it's possible that certain segments of crypto, but also the broader tech economy, could do well under her. That's sort of where we come out on. I think what would do well specifically under Harris is a much bigger question mark than what would do badly under a continuation. If Harris's regime looks like if Harris's administration looks like Biden's administration, I think it's pretty clear what would do badly. Whereas a lot would do well under Trump. I think it's a little different than when you look at thematic sector investing in equities, because typically the presidential candidates are much clearer. Like that like energy would do great under a Republican president, right? Because we really haven't gotten much, crypto's there, it's on the stage, but it's not so big that both candidates yet have to take clear positions. So a little wishy-washy, but we had some ideas there.
Yeah. Now, are you seeing investors do any of these trades? Meaning, like, if you wanted to make a small bet on just the outcome of the winner, you can make a 50-50 binary bet on Polymarket or anywhere else, where you basically are going to make somewhere slightly less than 100% return if you're right, and you're going to get a clear, zero, negative return, basically zero if you lose. Pretty binary, not the kind of thing investors tend to do. But if you say, okay, it's a 50-50 toss up, but if Trump wins, these coins are going to go up 300%, and they're only going to go down 20 if he loses, you'd think you would start kind of packaging these list of tokens, or again, going back to motif investing, like creating an investable universe that investors can really predict outcomes based on these different tokens. Are you getting any buy-in from that? Are there investors who are seeing the world the same way you guys are? Given that Galaxy is both an asset manager as well as a dealer and working with multiple investors around the world, tell me about how this went over when you guys put this out there, and what you're seeing from the rest of the world.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have seen some. It's a little, again, the fact that Harris is trying to position her campaign as positive without offering many details is, I think, muddying the water a little bit for investors and traders. But I would say we've seen interesting pair trades, at least thought of. I mean, can't facilitate all of these, right? But say a long Harris on prediction markets coupled with a long of a basket of altcoins, right, is an interesting way to, I think, capture that 3-to-1 upside versus downside that you mentioned. I think that's actually quite interesting. I think that is conceptually what we're trying to advance as the idea, right? That you could hedge a Harris win, perhaps using a prediction market or any other way that you think is expressive, right? Maybe I'm not an expert in traditional markets. Maybe there's good ways to use traditional vehicles.
We've looked at that too in our hedge funds. I mean, the problem is whenever you have such a binary outcome where it really is 50-50, you could never, the hedge ratio is impossible to work in any meaningful way, right? If you're trying to put together a $100 million portfolio that you think is going to double under Trump, but you have to hedge, 50 million of that with the Harris, and therefore it just doesn't, the math doesn't work very well.
To be honest, I'm happy you said that, because I was not able to figure out what the actual math on each side of that trade would be to be the correct way to express it. But it does feel intellectually, we definitely have seen some trading both in Bitcoin price if Trump is approved. It's just funny because, like we said, we don't think Trump is that Harris is uniquely bad for Bitcoin in any meaningful way. It's much more about an altcoin trade here, I think, honestly. And frankly, I think if Trump wins, altcoins outperform. For example, like I think the ETH BTC ratio bottoms the moment the market knows that Trump wins, in my opinion, because and it's not so much even Ethereum, obviously, of ETH ETFs, but it's the whole ecosystem of tokens and applications, and then of course other altcoins, say even those named by the SEC, this current SEC, as unregistered token, or what do they say, crypto assets offered as unregistered securities offerings, I think is the new language. But those should outperform, you would assume, right? I mean,
yeah, and I mean, you're seeing it in the Bitcoin mining stocks as well. They're starting to advance. Actually, pretty low correlations recently between the Bitcoin miners and Bitcoin, partly because a lot of them are converting into AI data centers, but also partly just because they do have a lot more upside here if you are betting on a Trump presidency. And I think ultimately, when it comes to markets, though, this is what happens, right? Everybody can come up with a thesis. Theses are a dime a dozen. It's how do you best express that thesis that investors get paid for. And I think that's where a lot of people are coming out, is after kind of battling and internally and putting pen to paper and thinking about all these scenarios. It's basically, if Trump wins, it's undeniably good for crypto. If Harris wins, it's not necessarily bad. And as a result, you're kind of like, well, the answer is just go long anyway, because you have the precedent of markets going higher after elections, no matter what. Anyway, you have this clear, a big winner if Trump wins, and you have this less clear if Harris wins. And ultimately, I think that's why you're starting to see the markets front run this a little bit into October here. And certainly September was a good month, and now, kind of flat in October, but starting to see a little strength today. Is basically every way you slice it, the answer is simply you have a really good positive outcome potentially for markets, and a uncertain to kind of, just blase result if Harris wins. So it seems to be what we're seeing, and it seems consistent maybe with what you're seeing as well on your desk.
I think that's right. I don't think you necessarily it's really hard to bet the farm. I saw some reporting on from one of the prime brokers, not in crypto, traditional prime broker, that investors were hesitant. I think it was Morgan Stanley options or Susquehanna's options desk was saying they weren't seeing massive election bets. But that's why it kind of feels just like a bleed higher situation. It's really hard. The Harris campaign has really not said much when it comes to financial regulatory policy, crypto, the things that really matter. They're just trying to sort of very blandly say like yay crypto, but not really actually. In fact, I think this new story yesterday and Harris's speech was the first time they've actually said crypto. I think leading into that, they'd only said blockchain and or digital assets, right? So that sort of very tepid, but in the right direction. That's what the campaign wants you to think. And so in that spot, I mean, what do? You probably don't sell, right? You probably are meant to hold and slightly buy, and that's sort of what it's felt like. I mean, obviously with some volatility, but feels like people are optimistic, I would say, just generally.
Yeah. I mean, where it really gets interesting from a market standpoint is if one of the candidates gets out to a monstrous lead pre-election, then you could start seeing some of those hedge trades where you go long one candidate on Polymarket and long market on. But at a 50-50 kind of toss-up, it really is probably the worst outcome for markets at this point would just be that we end up in December and still don't know who the winner is, right?
Certainly for like active managers looking to put on a trade, right? I mean, very tricky if it's a coin flip.
Yeah, and like I said, if there really is no clear winner on election night, and this bleeds into another couple of days, weeks, or whatever, that's the worst outcome for markets. We're talking to investors around the globe as well, and anybody who isn't already invested is waiting at this point, right? You're going to see a rush of capital into all markets. I mean, I think there's something like $6 trillion right now in money markets just sitting there in cash. I mean, money is going to get deployed into equities, into crypto, into any other type of funds as well, once there is a clear winner here. But we'll have to see.
Yeah. So, I think so. It's hard to see past a big catalyst like this. That's such a toss-up.
Yeah. All right, Alex, I think we're bumping up on time here, man. I took in enough of it already. I always appreciate you coming on. Before we go, anything in terms of where people can reach you or get more information from Galaxy or sign up for any newsletters?
Yeah, check us out, galaxy.com/research. I'm Intangible Coins on Twitter. We also just published our quarterly VC report today, which you can see at galaxy.com/research. Covers both sides of the venture coin, both the VCs investing in startups, but also VCs raising from allocators. Not just tooting our horn here, but I think we're the only one that has the fund side of that data. So check it out.
Awesome. Definitely check that out. And obviously from the Arca side, you can always check out all of the resources we have on our website, ar.ca/blog. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm at jdorman81, and we'll be back next week with some more insights into what's driving the market. So Alex, thanks again. Talk to you soon, sir.
Later, Jeff.